What's going on, everyone? My name's Tenebris Infinite, and welcome to my grand analysis video on the various armor types we can equip our doggo companion with in the latest update of Generation 0. Today, we'll see if our doggo has what it takes to handle the incoming threats of the world of Ostertorn. And we'll see if there are any surprise outcomes of these armor types, chalking up their costs to their efficiencies in combat. Our doggo friend has 4 types of incoming damage that we'll be paying attention to here in today's video. Ballistic damage, or the outright damage from guns to our doggo, fire damage, which is incredibly deadly to our metal mutt, explosive damage, and then lastly we'll try to see if these armor types can survive being stomped on by a tank. If you happen to enjoy today's video or learn something new, a like is greatly appreciated. There are 4 types of armor that we'll be looking at in today's video to go alongside the 4 different types of damage. We've got the standard runner armor, which protects from all types kind of evenly. Then we've got the ballistic plate armor, which protects from ballistic damage. Then we've got the concussive plate armor, which protects from explosion damage. And the fire retardant armor, which protects from fire damage. The cost of these armor types is going to come heavily into play for which armor type you're going to be using the most, depending on your resources available. So, the cheapest armor is the concussive plate armor, second to that is the fire retardant armor, then we have the ballistic plate armor as the 3rd most expensive, and the most expensive is the standard runner armor that you start off with. Now with the costs out of the way, let's get to the really fun stuff here and see what sort of damage these armor types will be taking here. So first off, for the standard runner armor, we'll see how much damage it'll take from the heavy machine gun on the tank. All these tests are done on skirmish, so you'll see less damage in adventure and more in guerrilla. And a single shot from the tank has a range of 1 to 3% of the total doggo's health. There are roughly 15 shots in a burst from a tank, meaning as a maximum you could see up to 45% damage, though the odds of that happening are slim to none. Then from explosive damage, you see a range of 1 to 5% per shot. With 6 rockets in a volley, there is a maximum of 30% damage, but again, the odds of that are pretty low, though not as low as the machine gun. Now for fire damage, and fire damage is disgusting to our doggo, destroying it in seconds. The fire damage itself only does 1%, but then it does damage over time for 1% per about a second. But that stacks and adds together with the constant stream of fire damage, so that 1% becomes an insane number of damage in a short amount of time. And lastly, letting our boyo get stomped on. We can see that each step from stomping does about 4 to 5% health on our doggo with the standard armor attached. It holds up actually pretty good to melee attacks overall. Now for the ballistic plate armor, and this stuff's an absolute beast. From the MG, we see it drop down to sometimes even 0% damage from a prototype tank. When it does do damage, it's only 1%, so it massively outplays the other armor types when it comes to ballistic reduction. Then for rocket damage, it only takes about 2% per rocket, a reduction in damage you maybe wouldn't expect. The overall protection of the ballistic plate is really great, even though it might be the 3rd most expensive armor in the bunch. Fire damage still absolutely wrecks the ballistic plate, but impressively it holds off the damage a bit better than the standard armor does. Then lastly, for melee damage, we see it drop down to a solid 4% per hit when you're using the ballistic plate. This includes the basic stomp attack as well, as the run attack and stomp attack have the same base damage. Now for concussive armor, and concussive is again a very powerful armor when at max level. For bullets, it reduces the damage to 1 to 2%, which isn't as massive as the ballistics protection, but when it comes to explosions, it nullifies all of the incoming damage, basically making your doggo immune to a very common damage type with a ton of stagger to it. Being immune to rockets from, say, an Apocalypse Harvester or the Reaper with its constant nuclear damage is a huge buff to our doggo companion. Though bullets may do more damage, the concussive is technically a bit more defensive than the ballistic, especially when we take fire damage into consideration. The best way to see fire reduction is how it affects the damage over time, and with concussive plates you do receive more fire protection than you would with the ballistic plates, allowing your doggo to survive just a bit longer in these endgame areas. In terms of the cost, too, we see the concussive as cheaper than the ballistic, so when it comes down to between the two, concussive is solidly in the lead. But now, let's see how the fire retardant armor does in terms of its performance. And lastly, for the fire retardant armor, for its ballistic protection from a proto-tank on skirmish difficulty, you'll see a damage range of 1 to 3% per shot, meaning slightly less defense than the concussive plate when it comes to ballistics. That extra percent might not seem like much, but it will add up over time with max damage rolls in comparison to either of the other DLC armor plates. Then for rocket damage, we see 1 to 4% per rocket, a small reduction from standard armor, but lacking what the ballistic offers and far from what the concussive adds. Now for the type of damage this armor was made for. Fire damage, and this armor is the only armor to fare as well as it does against fire damage, but there is one weak point to it that'll show in just a second here. But against one flamethrower, the fire retardant armor does quite well. Though when you add one more flamethrower into the mix, that's when this armor starts to go downhill. It can only handle so much chip damage, and eventually that adds up to such insane amounts that the armor's protection becomes irrelevant. So maybe fire retardant offers better physical protection. And nope. Really, the fire retardant is only slightly better than your typical runner armor overall. So to rank these armor types, I'd say the standard is the worst armor, next up is the fire retardant, then the ballistic plate, and the best armor for its price and effectiveness is the concussive armor. You just can't beat becoming immune to explosives. The overall protection from the concussive adds more than enough to survive fights in the endgame regions of Generation Zero, though you will still need to replace it quite often. So, in the end here, I want to know, what do you think of runner armor in Generation Zero? I personally think it could be buffed to last longer, but we'll be talking about that in a future video here. For now, I want to say thank you for watching this analysis video. A lot more work goes into these than you may expect, so again, any support is appreciated. But for now, I will catch you all in the next one. Until then, peace.